Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and very much welcome to Nobel Forum for the announcement of this year's Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. So my name is Thomas Perlman and I'm the Secretary of the Nobel Assembly. I will first read the announcement in Swedish, followed by English. We will then present background to the discoveries and open up for questions. So here we go in Swedish. Nobelförsamlingen vid Karolinska Institutet har idag beslutat att Nobelpriset i fysiologi eller medicin år 2021 ska delas lika mellan David Julius och Ardem Patapoutian för deras upptäckter av receptorer för temperatur och beröring. So to English. The Nobel Assembly at Karolinska Institute has today decided to award the 2021 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine jointly to David Julius and Ardem Patapoutian for their discoveries of receptors for temperature and touch. Here are the two laureates. David Julius was born in 1955 in New York. He performed his prize-winning studies at University of California, San Francisco, where he's still active. Ardem Patapoutian was born in 1967 in Beirut, in Lebanon. In his youth, he moved to Los Angeles in the USA. He performed his prize-winning work at Scripps Research La Jolla, California, where he's still active. I will now turn to Professor Patrik Ernfors, adjunct member of the Nobel Committee, who will now describe the discovery. Thank you.
This year's Nobel Prize concerns our senses. Our senses allow us to perceive and interpret the world around us. Specialized sense organs, such as our eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, endow us with vision, hearing, smell, and taste. This year's Nobel Prize has to do with our ability to feel temperature and touch, a sense which is called somatosensation. Imagine that you're walking barefoot across a field on a summer's morning. You can feel the warmth of the sun, the coolness of the morning dew, a caressing summer breeze, and the fine texture of blades of grass underneath your feet. These impressions of temperature, touch, and movement are feelings relying on somatosensation. Somatosensation is what gives us the ability to feel our body surface and internal organs. It monitors temperature, pain, touch, and the location and movement of our body, called proprioception. Such information continuously flows from the skin and other deep tissues and connects us with the external and internal world. It is also essential for tasks that we perform effortlessly and without much thought. For example, when taking a coffee on the go, a flow of information from sensors in legs and arms keep track on their position in space. Sensors in the skin registers the texture, size, and shape of the coffee cup, how warm it is, and correct the grip strength to keep a hold on the cup. How physical stimuli, such as heat and touch, can be registered has fascinated humankind for thousands of years. The French philosopher René Descartes envisioned in the 17th century how this could work, invoking a thread between the skin and the brain. moving particles of fire on the skin pull the thread and open the valve in the brain. During the past century, scientists discovered specialized sensory neurons which have long processes called nerves. The nerves located in, for example, the skin or muscle registers changes in our external and internal environment. There are different types of nerves that detect different kinds of stimuli, such as heat and touch. But how can heat and touch be registered by the nervous system? In some way, the nerves must convert the physical stimuli of heat and touch into a biological signal. Thus, molecular receptors must exist on nerves that detect and convert heat and touch into nerve impulses. The identity of such receptors remained unknown until this year's prize-winning work. Capsaicin, the active component of chili peppers, was an essential tool for one of the awarded discoveries. When we eat a spicy meal with chili peppers, it gives a burning, sometimes even painful sensation. We start sweating. Thus, it seems that capsaicin can trick the brain into thinking there is an actual change in body temperature. It was known that capsaicin activates sensory neurons and that this activation is responsible for the burning sensation when eating chili peppers. However, the molecular receptor detecting capsaicin remained a mystery. Now we turn to the work that gave rise to this year's Nobel Prize. David Julius and his co-workers wished to identify the receptor for capsaicin on sensory neurons. Julius assumed that a single gene active in sensory neurons was responsible. He therefore made millions of DNA fragments corresponding to the genes that are active in sensory neurons, hoping that at least one of these would contain the gene for the capsaicin receptor. He introduced single DNA fragments into cells that are insensitive to capsaicin, and then added capsaicin and recorded activity. This was a high-risk project, but after looking through large amounts of DNA fragments, the team finally succeeded and identified the capsaicin receptor. It turned out to be a novel protein named TRPV1, localized in the cell's outer membrane. TRPV1 was shown to function as a channel for so-called ions. When Julius tested how TRPV1 reacted to warm temperatures, he noticed that heat opened the channel for ions. He had discovered a temperature-sensitive ion channel activated by heat that is perceived as painful. A few years later, Julius and the other laureate of this year, Ardem Patapoutian, independently searched for a cold-sensitive channel and discovered a related channel, TRPM8. Soon after this, additional related channels were shown to contribute to temperature sensitivity. We now know that a number of different TRP channels activated at different temperature intervals act together to code for temperature sensation and for heat-induced pain. While the mechanism for temperature sensation was unfolding, the molecular mechanism for the sensation of touch remained an enigma. The sensation of touch is started by mechanical force, such as when poking on the skin. This can be mimicked in a simpler cell system by directly poking on the membrane of a cell, while at the same time measuring activity of the same cell. Ardem Patapoutian and co-workers used this system and identified a cell line that was mechanosensitive. In these cells, Patapoutian identified 72 candidate genes that he thought could be the critical sensor activated by mechanical force. One by one, each of the 72 candidate genes was silenced, and the cells were tested for mechanosensitivity. After nearly a year of painstaking work, 71 of the 72 genes had been tested without any promising results. But when gene number 72 was silenced, sensitivity to poking was lost. The mechanosensitive receptor had been discovered and was named piezo1, after the Greek word for pressure, piesi. Through its similarity to piezo1, a second gene was found and was named piezo2. Patapoutian demonstrated that piezo proteins belong to an entirely novel class of proteins and function as ion channels activated by mechanical force. Importantly, piezo2 was then found to be the long-sought sensor for touch and proprioception, senses we use, for example, in a hug. So to summarize, the work by David Julius and Ardem Patapoutian has unlocked one of the secrets of nature by explaining the molecular basis for sensing temperature and mechanical force. This represents a foundation for our perception of temperature, heat pain, touch, and the location and movement of our body called proprioception. In further work, TRIP and piezo channels have been found to play key roles in many aspects of physiology, thus establishing far-reaching roles of the newly identified temperature and mechanically sensitive ion channels.
Thank you, Patrick. So here we have the two laureates again, and I would like to open up for a few questions. I know many of you probably want to have separate interviews, but please go ahead if there is any question. Yes? Yeah, it was a tough year getting in touch with them. So the reason we were a few minutes late in here was actually that I just managed to get hold of them with the help of one father and one sister-in-law. So it was some tracing of phone numbers, and I just got hold of them. Only had a few minutes to talk to them, but they were incredibly happy, and as far as I could tell, they were very surprised. And a little bit shocked, maybe. So it was a pleasure, really, to give them these news.
Hello, Paul Rees, Al Jazeera English. Why was it decided that this breakthrough was the most important this year, just this particular one, out of all the possible ones?
Was the question how we decided that it was the most important? Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a little bit hard to answer without sort of breaching confidentiality. We always have fantastic candidates in front of us that we investigate over the year. And our job is to select the candidates that we this year find to be the most worthy winners of this year's prize. And in this case, this has been our choice, and it's hard to give any more details on that.
Just some kind of scientific reason?
The scientific reason, I think, was marvelously told by Professor Arnfors here. This really unlocks one of the secrets of nature in terms of being one of our senses. And it explains at a molecular level now how nerve signals can be converted, or these stimuli can be converted into nerve signals so that we can adapt. It's actually something that is crucial for our survival. So it's very important and profound discovery.
I suppose, how do you see it affecting research and development of medicine in the
Yeah, I think I'll pass the word to Professor Nils-Göran Larsson, who is part of the panel and the chair of the Nobel Committee.
Thank you. That's, of course, a very good question. I mean, we are awarding here a very major basic scientific discovery of receptors for temperature and touch. And as you know, there is a lot of medical problems involving pain. And these novel receptors will for sure be targets for drug development in the future. So I think, like all big basic scientific discoveries, there will be also translational effects in the future with development of treatments.
There's one up here. Okay, same question.
Yes, David Keaton again from the Associated Press. Now, obviously, we can't really not talk about COVID. It has impacted, I'm sure, the work of the committee and all of our lives in the past year and a half. Obviously, without talking about the nominations, which you can probably not talk about, have you seen in the past year and a half research, work, applications, maybe vaccines, that when you see this and when you read these papers, you think, this will maybe be a Nobel Prize in the future?
That may be a relevant question, but it's not really how we work, because we perform our work originating from nominations. So we're waiting for nominations, and always when we get a nomination that is new to us, we do a very thorough investigation. But I mean, of course, big breakthroughs in medicine, they usually reach us. I'm not able to say more than that in this particular case. Is there any more? There's one over here.
Thank you. I'm from Nordic Chinese Times. Apart from applications to medicine and treatment, I think this concept can also be used in a more futuristic setup, as in VR or this metaverse concept that's been developing in the computer science community. So I was wondering if that kind of application would also came into being one day.
So for virtual reality applications in computer world, for example, I'll let Professor Ehrenfors respond to that also.
Somebody else. No, I think that, of course, our somatosensor system is really critical for everyday activities that we have, that I tried to explain in my presentation. So, I mean, for example, I don't know exactly what you were referring to, but of course, like if you have exoskeletons or, new tools that need to be trained, of course, they have to perceive the same kind of information we do in order to perform well. So I'm not sure exactly how much of this year's prize has been implemented in that area, but certainly the same kinds of signals need to be registered and processed, just like we do in our brain. So I think that surely there is a lot to learn by studying our physiology in terms of also applying that on, for example, exoskeletons or other AI learning processes.
Okay, let's see if there's one more here.
Yes, there are some very rare medical conditions where patients don't register pain, and they can get injuries very easily. Are these receptors relevant for those medical conditions?
Could I ask Professor Per Svenningsson, who is also a neurologist, to respond to that question?
Yes, there is one gain of function mutation, so you get an overstimulated TRPA1 receptor. And if you have that, you develop something that is called a familial episodic pain syndrome. And that can be triggered, for example, by cold or by stressors. So there is one familial syndrome.
Maybe you could mention something about potential drugs and drug development against pain.
Yes, so there are, first of all, capsaicin itself is actually used in the clinics, especially if you have had shingles and you get pain after that, then capsaicin is actually used in the clinics. Then there are also efforts to develop compounds that target TRPV1 and also TRPA1, especially against chronic pain.
There's one over there. Could we get the microphone?
Hi, I was wondering if what are the papers or particular conferences perhaps that have played the biggest role in guiding your decision? Do you work like that? That you look at certain papers that have been published by the Nobel laureates?
If I'll try and answer that, I mean, we always look at the most worthy candidates based on the discoveries that they have made. And it's hard to say a particular type of investigation. Obviously, I mean, scientific papers are crucial, but it's not any particular type of journal. We look everywhere and we do it extremely thoroughly. Which are the papers? I see. In the press material, you'll have actually 8 articles that we mention particularly that are crucial, that we find are key to the discoveries this year. So sorry, I misunderstood your question. I think it's easier if you look in the press material and you'll get it. Okay. I don't see any more hands, and I know several wants interviews. And if you haven't announced a request for interview, we'll try and help you anyway if we can. So thank you very much for coming. Thanks.
Jag tar hennes dator. Vi got it all.
Professor Abdel El-Mira, a member of the Nobel Committee, how would you summarize what this year's Nobel Prize was awarded for?
This Nobel Prize has been awarded for our ability to sense heat, cold, and touch. And this Nobel Prize for the discovery is made in a way to find the receptors that sense changes in temperature and also change when touch each other and get in contact with each other.
Receptor is a bit complicated word. If you were to explain the discovery to a child, what would you say?
So when there is a change in temperature, there are sensors in our skin that are sensing these changes, either when there is like a burning sun, or if you put your hand in a cold water, those sensors are being activated and they are formed by these receptors that were discovered. In addition, when we touch each other, there are other receptors that are activated and convert the touch into nerve signals sent to the brain.
How would you say does this discovery affect our lives?
Without these channels, we will not be able to protect ourselves. If we put our hand in a fire, these receptors send information to our brain and tell us to avoid touching a burning place. In addition, these are for the temperature sensing receptors. The touch sensing receptors are also important for giving us information where our body parts are placed in space. And without them, we will not be able to stand, we will not be able to touch and feel our surroundings.
And why is this discovery being awarded now? Recognized now, sorry.
Why is it recognized now? The discovery has been made more than a decade. These two discoveries were made more than a decade ago. But it's probably just the right time for this discovery to be recognized because it has profoundly changed our view of how we sense the world around us.
Is this research in any way connected to helping us fight COVID-19?
Well, as you know, this is not directly related to COVID, but as you know, during the last year, we have been socially distancing from each other. We have missed the sense of touch, the sense of the warmth that we give to each other, like during a hug. And during a hug, when hugging each other, these are the receptors that give us that feeling of the warmth and the closeness to each other.
So if we turn to the laureates, what can you tell us about the two laureates?
What can I tell about the laureates?
The laureates, yes.
Well, the laureates are very established and fantastic researchers that have really transformed our view. They have set up to really unlock one of the mysteries of nature. In other words, what are the sensors that allow us to interact with the outside world? And they have been working with really a lot of vision and hard work to be able to make these important discoveries.
And then David Julius, what was his part of this work?
David Julius was mostly interested in understanding how we sense the burning heat that is given by the chili pepper when we eat a hot food, for example. And he found the receptor that is sensing this chili or capsaicin, which is the active compound. And he realized soon after, when he discovered the receptor, that the receptor also is sensing heat. And it's a thermosensitive receptor. Ardem Patapoutian wants to know which are the receptors that are allowing us to sense touch and mechanical change in the force on our body or our skin. And then he made the important discovery for finding the piezo channels.
And I understand that Thomas Perman has been able to get in touch with them. What did they say when they got the call?
He just talked with them briefly because it was very hard to find. And then they were basically overwhelmed and surprised by the fact that they were awarded this year Nobel Prize. But they were, of course, delighted and happy.
And finally, could you please in 30 seconds tell me why are you excited by this year's prize?
Well, this is one of the fundamental functions of our body. And this is the way our nervous system gets to know what is happening in the outside world. And this is how what makes us basically who we are, by transforming, reacting to the outside environment and getting to adapt our behavior and also our interactions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.